It's the All Things Strange podcast. We are your hosts, Agent Anderson and
Agent Ether.
Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can find all of our wonderful links in the description on the Linktree, where you can find our Discord, our Patreon, our merchandise, and more. This week's episode from the Files of Project Bluebook. I kind of messed up the ending there. That's okay. I can edit it. I can fix it in the edit.
It was close. It was close.
Yeah, it's close. I just mistimed it a little bit there. But anyways, from the Files of Project Bluebook, this week's episode. As voted upon by our Patreon subscribers, we've got two wonderful tiers for you. The first tier, coming in at only $3 a month, will get you early access, after hours, and bonus episodes. And we usually do these out ahead of time a little bit, so if you want to jump the line, so to speak, you don't have to pay $100 for a fast pass in this case. It's only $3. And the second tier will get you the ability to vote on upcoming topics such as this one. This time around, it was from the Files of Project Bluebook versus I think it was the Langenberg event. It was one of the Royal Canadian Mint came out with another coin celebrating a famous Canadian UFO case, and I think it was Langenberg. It might have been Duluth or something. I forgot. I'd have to check. Anyways, those were the two choices this week: a Canadian UFO sighting and Bluebook. And our fans on Patreon voted upon Project Bluebook. It's a perennial favorite.
It really is.
Yeah, it's good stuff. All right. Well, I think that's good for the introductions. Without any further delays, why don't we get into the episode?
Okay, I'll go ahead and go first. So when I was looking through the Bluebook files last night, I was kind of having trouble choosing a topic.
Yeah, there's so much to choose from.
There is so much to choose from. And I'm like, what am I interested in? What do I want to look for? Is there a year? Is there a date? And I ran across just kind of flipping through, kind of, getting the old gears turning, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I ran across an article about a space monkey.
A space monkey?
Space monkey. So at first I was like, maybe I'll do some strange news. But that was kind of hard, actually, to kind of sort through all the files and try and find strange news.
Right.
Based on Project Bluebook, because you're doing it by word search.
Yeah.
So I kind of went and I took it from there and I was like, well, maybe I'll just look at things that are so obviously hoaxes.
Yeah.
There is without a shadow of a doubt.
Right.
Not only am I going to conclude, but the military concludes that these are indeed hoaxes, but good hoaxes, good fun. So let's go ahead and start with Martian is a monkey.
Okay.
All right. So this is a newspaper clipping from July 9th, 1953 in Atlanta, Georgia. A young barber said today he shaved a dead monkey and passed it off as a visitor from outer space to win a $10 bet that he couldn't get his picture in the papers. So his friends are out drinking one day and they're like, yeah. I bet you can't get your picture in the paper. And he's like, I bet you a tenner I can, a 10 note, right?
Right.
I don't know, 53, $10, that's a lot of money.
That raises all sorts of questions. For instance, where did they get a dead monkey?
So let's see if it says Ed Waters, 28, won the bet. His picture was widely used locally and was transmitted to newspapers throughout the country yesterday. The monkey cost him $50, and a judge fined him $40 today for obstructing a highway while staging a fake incident designed to support his story about a flying saucer and mysterious little men from another world. Word had gotten around that a glowing red saucer carrying little men from outer space had landed on a highway Tuesday night. Waters produced a 21-inch long, 4-pound creature that he said he killed with his pickup truck, while other similar things hopped into the saucer and flew away in a blast of light.
I've actually heard this story before.
It's a good story.
Yeah.
An Emory University anatomy professor declared the spaceman was an Earth monkey, and Dr. Herman Jones, head of the state crime laboratory, performed an autopsy and came up with the same conclusion.
Okay.
The barber took the blame for it all to spare his two companions. Cobb County Superior Judge James T. Manning fined Waters $40 after he was picked up on a warrant charging cruelty to animals. The cruelty charge was dismissed when Police Chief John Lee found the monkey was killed in another county. Chief Lee said Waters told him he bought the monkey in Atlanta, anesthetized it
Anesthetized?
with ether and killed it with a blow on the head.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
He then shaved the animal, amputated its tail, and passed it off as a monkey.
That's just the worst.
It is the worst. I didn't know you could easily get monkeys. I think nowadays it'd even be harder to get a monkey, but
Yeah.
I don't know, even with the internet and stuff. There's actually, and there was a Blue Book file on it. So there's not only a newspaper clipping, but they went out and they did an investigation. They investigated it. And there's a short little case file in here, but it basically says the same thing as the newspaper clipping. So
Ugh, what a piece of crap.
pretty much he's like, I'm going to win this bet.
So I looked it up. $10 in 1950 is about $130 in today's money.
Okay.
So $40 would be roughly $600 or $500 or something.
So he initially gave a statement for Project Bluebook when they came out to investigate. And there were 3 observers from Atlanta. They were driving on Highway 76 near Mapleton, Georgia, when they encountered a flying saucer in the middle of the road. There were 3 small animals near this red-colored saucer. As the observers bore down on the object, 2 of the animals entered and escaped. The saucer rose and disappeared at a 45-degree angle. It turned a light blue in color, and the observer's car struck the 3rd animal and knocked him unconscious. After getting out of the car and finding this animal was approximately 21 inches in length, had long ears, no hair, and no tail, the observer stayed at the scene and several other automobiles stopped. The animal died 30 minutes later and was taken to an Atlanta newspaper office, and a reporter for the newspaper called the FBI, who were then called out to investigate the incident. So that's all there is to this particular case.
Interesting.
Interesting, or just, a hoax.
Yeah, just a hoax.
Just a hoax. And then I have a different case here. And I liked this one because at the very top, handwritten, it is just a short, 2-page typed paper, but at the top, handwritten, it says, "Captain, we just ain't getting the good ones."
Nice.
Insufficient data. So on March 1957, there was an issue of Sir magazine, and apparently I looked it up. This is like a men's sex magazine.
Okay, I don't think I've heard of it.
I haven't either, but it's from the 50s. So, and you can write in, and there's columns and who knows what else. I didn't want to look into it in detail. So it's a magazine. So just by the nature of the magazine, the file says it raises a question as to whether or not it's a piece of fiction. But we can attest that it's bona fide because they wrote to the writer, Odvar Larson, and Larson wrote directly to them that the date was November 23rd, 1954, and there was a great landing wave in France. I guess this was in Norway.
Mm-hmm.
And the witnesses were 3 little girls, and Anne, Tora Stordenal, and Tora Hoy in a district somewhere in France. Anne was 10 years old and the other 2 were 9, and they were all frightened out of their wits. They were coming home from school near some woods, and a black object descended rapidly from the skies, knocking snow from the treetops, and stopped only a few feet above the girls' heads. It looked like a stone, like a ball about 10 feet across, and the lower part was black but trimmed with yellow spots, which could have been made of glass. And there were also a number of small red, I think it says jags. The upper part was transparent, and the trees could be seen through it, and a sort of human or semi-human pilot was visible inside operating controls. It was dressed in black, and the man or entity had big eyes, covered by a pair of immense red glasses, which, when he looked through them, he looked straight at the girls. The craft rose again with a droning sound, brushed a high-tension line, struck sparks from it, and an odor came off that one of the girls said smelled like fried sausages, and then the little girls ran for their lives. So the
fried sausages, that smells yummy.
Fried sausage UFO. Yummy. So when the story came down to the person who submitted it to the magazine, he said he thought it was a little funny. So he went down to the snow and found and photographed a disturbing track 25 yards long made by the craft after the girls had turned their back onto it. And then the Blue Book file goes on to say that the research section is not in a position to endorse this case, but the evidence supporting it does not appear to be very good, even though there is a striking parallel between this case and a case in Hemingford, Quebec in 1954, where a spherical craft was reported with men 7 foot tall, dressed in black with big round eyes. The Hemingford's case claim is acceptably likewise says rests principally on the good impression of honesty and sanity given by the writers in a taped interview for which the saucer world is indebted to investigator Dittman, Mr. Dittmar, director of the UFO Information Services, who has tapes sent in. So I'm not sure about what that's all about.
They sent in tapes?
Yeah, it says something about tapes. And it says, although he does this for free and gratis, you should send him a couple of dollars to repay him for his time. Yeah. But then it says that there's insufficient data and they believe it's a hoax.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It's in some men's magazines.
Right. Sir Magazine?
Yeah.
So I looked up Sir Magazine. We'll talk about it in the after hours.
It's bad, right?
No, actually.
It's not bad? Okay.
No. We'll talk about it later.
Okay, we'll talk about it in the after hours.
I don't want to derail the episode.
Okay, and then before I go on to my next case, maybe you can cut in with your case and then we'll get back. I have a case I really want to talk about. It's quite lengthy.
Is it the one with the robots?
It is the one with robots, yes.
I can't wait. All right. So my case was, originally I was going to do Project Bluebook special reports, just kind of, maybe not all of them, just maybe some of them. But while I was looking for those reports, they're on NICAP, but that website or that link is down, and the Internet Archive link is down for that as well, for whatever reason, I don't know. So that I ran into that little problem. I could find them somewhere else, but while I was looking for that, I found lots of other really cool stuff. One of those things I will talk about today. And before I get started on that, though, one of the things I found that I was sort of tickled by, a website of OSI, which is government division. I don't want to go into what they do. That's a whole other topic, but they are one of the major government agencies out there doing stuff. Here's a quote from one of their websites talking about Project Bluebook. Quote, contemporary strategic thinkers did not necessarily consider the possibility of alien life, but rather that the craft would be of Soviet origin. Now that is absolute, utter bullshit.
That's garbage.
I've talked before about the estimate of the situation where our military came to the conclusion that the crafts we were seeing were extraterrestrial crafts. And that was, I think, in the late 40s, I think 49. I forget the exact date, but that was really early on. It was pretty much right away they came to that conclusion. And here you have a government website. They're just always trying to lie about it. It's weird. I don't know. Anyways, I don't want to go on about that too much. I just thought that was a really interesting quote from a major government website because it's flatly, provably false. Okay, so Black Vault Radio, I was listening to a recent episode from John Greenwald Jr. He does the Black Vault, and he has a podcast. I was listening to that, and he mentioned that his website had the reports. Well, his website is notoriously difficult to search, and I couldn't actually find the reports on his website. But I came across a really cool post on his website about the Condon Committee. So the Condon Committee, I've talked about it before, that went on from 1966 to 1968. It was a University of Colorado study to evaluate UFOs and Project Bluebook and whether or not it should continue. And they concluded that they should shut down Project Bluebook, and they did so in 1969, technically the beginning part of 1970, but we're kind of splitting hairs at that point. Anyways, they issued a 1,500-page report. 1,500 pages. And believe it or not, there's a lot of really good investigation work done in this. I kind of want to read through some of it for bonus episodes and whatnot. It's really, really good. But we're looking at a specific part. Interestingly, Chapter 6, the government released the Condon Committee, and it's available online. But interestingly, Chapter 6 went missing. There's about 70 pages missing from the government's version, which is available online. And Chapter 6 just so happens to be visual observations made by U.S. astronauts. Ooh, I think we talked about this before, but I don't think we've gone over the document. So, according to the Black Vault, or John Greenwald's website, these pages were available in some text versions of the report online, but they were in really obscure places and they were not easy to find. They're I think there's like 5 copies online. You can find like not that many, there's just a handful. And they all trace their copies back to a group called National Capital Area Skeptics, who worked with the University of Colorado directly to get the copy more than 20 years ago. So although they're available online, they're not available, this section is not available directly from the government, and you don't know if anything's been altered or modified. So it's always nice to have the documents directly from the government so you can verify that they are accurate and that you are reading the actual real unaltered documents, right? So that's why I think why I'm not speaking for Mr. Greenwald Jr. here, but that's why I suspect he's interested in this. You'd have to ask him. He didn't say. But anyways, it's always nice to have the original document. A complete copy of the Condon Committee report was found in the archive of the National Technical Information Service, or NTIS, which here's a quote from their website or their mission statement. They aim to provide the support and structure that helps out partners securely store, analyze, sort, and aggregate data in new ways. They're part of the Department of Commerce, and they basically provide data to various parties for reasons of commerce. But also they do data. I'm not sure why they would have a UFO report, but have it they did. So their stuff used to be behind a paywall, but apparently more recently it's gone out of the paywall and you can just get the data for free now. So it doesn't say who on the Black Vault, but somebody searched and they found the full report. So now we have the missing 70 pages from the Condon Committee report that have been missing for a long time from the actual government's release. All right, so nobody knows why the pages went missing. It could be anything. It could be a coincidence. It could be some sort of clerical error. But the fact that the entire chapter and a few pages before and a few pages after, that entire chunk is missing, a huge chunk of the report, an entire chapter and then some, that is extremely suspicious. So it looks like it was on purpose, but we don't know for sure. It could be a mistake, but I mean, come on. I'm leaning more towards the cover-up theory myself. All right, well, anyways, let's get to the missing pages. The end of the previous chapter is in the document, so that the document doesn't start with Chapter 6. It starts with the end of Chapter 5. There are some UFO sightings here, and I won't go over all of them, but I did find one that was so interesting, I had to talk about it. I can't help it. This is a really good sighting. All right, case number 21, Colorado Springs, Colorado, May 13th, 1967 at 1540 LST. Not sure what LST is. 1640 MDT. I'm not sure what MDT is either. Anyways, doesn't matter. This is a radar-only case and is of particular interest because the UFO could not be seen when there was every indication that it should have been seen. From the time the UFO was first picked up on radar to the time the Braniff flight touched down on runway 35, the UFO track behaved like a ghost echo, perhaps a ground return, being reflected from the aircraft. This is indicated by the fact that the UFO blip appeared at about twice the range of the Braniff blip and on the same azimuth, although the elevation angle appears to have been different. When Braniff touched down, however, the situation changed radically. The UFO blip pulled to the right and passed over the airport at an indicated height of about 200 feet. As pointed out by the FAA, this is precisely the correct procedure for an overtaking aircraft, or one which is practicing an ILS approach but does not actually intend to touch down. Although the UFO track passed within 1.5 miles of the control tower, and the personnel there were alerted to the situation, the UFO was not visible even through binoculars. A Continental Airlines flight, which was monitored 3 to 4 miles behind the UFO at first contact, was flying in the same direction, never saw it either. A ghost echo seems to be ruled out by at least the following considerations. Got to do a page turn here. 1. A ghost echo, either direct or indirect, normally will not be indicated at a height of 200 feet, while the ghost producer is on the ground, as was the case here. And 2. A direct ghost is always at the same azimuth as the moving target, and an indirect ghost is on the same azimuth as the fixed reflector involved. If an indirect ghost were involved here, the ghost echo would thus have always appeared well to the east of Braniff, not at the same azimuth. The radar flight characteristics of the UFO in this case were all comparable with the hypothesis that the unknown was a Century Series jet, yet nothing was ever seen or heard. This must remain as one of the most puzzling radar cases on record, and no conclusion is possible at this time.
Oh.
So you got to understand the Condon Committee. The guy in charge was a hardcore skeptic, and he was handpicked to debunk these sightings. That was his goal from the beginning. It was not an actual scientific effort on his part, but he didn't do all the sub-reports, right? He didn't write all of these reports. Other people did.
Right.
So this is somebody who's, an actual, I don't know who wrote this, but probably like an actual scientist or something. And this is not like some kind of UFO nut writing this. This is somebody who's doing like an actual investigation. And they said this must remain as one of the most puzzling radar cases on record, and no conclusion is possible at this time. It seems inconceivable that an anomalous propagation echo would behave in the manner described, particularly with respect to the reported altitude changes, even if anomalous propagation had been likely at the time. In view of the meteorological situation, it would seem that AP, or anomalous propagation, was rather unlikely. Besides, what is the probability that an AP return would appear only once, and at that time appear to execute a perfect practice ILS approach? So here we have a UFO that's apparently following another plane, and then when the plane lands, it does a very low altitude maneuver. 200 feet is extremely low altitude, flies over the airport, and then takes off.
That's basically like right above the ground.
Yeah, right above the ground.
It came down, did maneuvers right above the ground, and then took off.
Yeah, and so it was ghosting this aircraft. It was following an aircraft at the same azimuth, and then it takes off, but it's invisible. Nobody can see it. Nobody can hear it. Wild stuff. This is like one of the cooler radar cases that I've seen. A radar non-visual. Usually radar visuals are awesome. Here's a radar non-visual that's really fascinating. I love this case.
I don't know if I've ever heard anything quite like that before.
Yeah, isn't it pretty wild?
Yeah.
All right, so let me flip through some pages here. I'm flipping through, so this is the remainder of the chapter. There's good stuff in here, but none of it is as good as that one. So, I mean, if you guys are interested in this kind of stuff, go check out the Condon Committee report. There's 1,500 pages of awesomeness there. All right, now here's just a quote in the summary of this chapter I thought was interesting. Item number 6. There is a small but significant residue of cases from the radar visual files that have no plausible explanation as propagation phenomena and or misinterpreted man-made objects. So it's funny, the way they word that is there's a small but significant residue. Like they don't even want to admit it. It's like they're not going to say there's this number of cases. They're like, it's just a little residue, just a little scintillating tidbit of cases. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're trying to downplay it as much as possible. I thought that was kind of amusing.
Like even one is, significant.
Yeah, but they're calling it a the wording.
Cases, yeah.
I was kind of tickled by that wording. They just really, really don't want it to be true. All right, now here we are at Chapter 6, Visual Observations Made by U.S. Astronauts. Astronauts in orbit view the Earth, its atmosphere, and the astronomical sky from altitudes ranging from 100 to 800 nautical miles, or 160 to 1,300 kilometers above mean sea level, well above many of the restrictions of the ground-based observer. They are skilled and accurate observations. Their eyesight is excellent. They have an intimate familiarity with navigational astronomy and a broad understanding of the basic physical sciences. Their reports from orbit of visual sightings therefore deserve careful consideration. So that's what they mean when usually they just refer to people like this as a trained observer. Trained observers are not like a real thing, but astronauts are uniquely qualified to observe things in space. Obviously. So there's some really cool data in here. I'm skipping, here's a table of all the astronauts up to this point, how long they've spent in orbit, and what their flight designations were. For example, Buzz Aldrin had spent 94 hours, 34 minutes in orbit, and his flight designation was GT-12. And then the leader was astronaut Lovell with 425 hours, 29 minutes in orbit, GT-7 and GT-12. So it's interesting table, but there's a lot of stuff here that I'm skipping that's like this that is very interesting data, but not necessarily stuff that we need to go over with a fine-tooth comb. And this includes Russian astronauts, by the way, as well. Like the next page, log of manned flights, it starts with Yuri Gagarin, a Russian dude who I believe was the first man in space, at least officially. I could be wrong about that, but if I remember correctly. And then here's a table with different experiments that they had, the visual experiments that they had the astronauts do in space. Really cool stuff, but not necessarily UFOs, but just really interesting stuff. I find this kind of stuff fascinating because I'm a nerd, and you can read and it tells you, you always wonder, okay, what are they doing up there? What did they do up there? Well, one thing they did was observe dim light phenomena to increase our knowledge of auroras, faint comets near the sun, faint magnitude limit of stars, geoshine, liberation, clouds, meteorite flashes, and zodiacal light, stuff like that. I mean, just really cool stuff. If you're interested in that, check it out. But we won't go over all of that. So here's just an excerpt from Spacecraft as an Observatory. So in effect, therefore, 94% of the solid angle of spacecraft around the capsule was at any given moment out of view of the spacecraft occupants. That's an interesting point. In this case, we're talking about a little capsule that has a little tiny window. So at any point in time, 94% of what's out there is obscured from view. So they can't really see very much stuff at all. So the Gemini window, for example, was 6 inches tall by 6.5 inches on the bottom wide and 13 inches tall, or 13 inches wide at the top, sort of like a trapezoid shape. So basically 6 inches by roughly 10 inches, let's say. So we're talking about a pretty small window there, right? Here's a little picture.
Let me see.
A little diagram.
It's so little.
Just a cute, tiny little window, because visual observations, believe it or not, were not super important for their mission. That's not really what they were there to do. It was only a very small part. So it's just an interesting detail that, you imagine in space they would be able to see a lot, but actually they were able to see very, very little. And another thing that's interesting, that's probably relevant, is that there were differences from one flight to another in viewing quality of the windows, and from one window to the other on the same flight. The reason for this is when they launched the capsules into space, I guess gases and things from the launch would put, smudges and dirt on the window. So once they got to outer space, there would be dirt and smudges and things on the window that would change your viewing. It was not easy to view stuff. In fact, some of the flights would have more smudges than others, and you would have very, very poor visibility out of the window. Some flights you didn't have. It just depends on, randomness, and they came up with a system to try to get rid of that, but it didn't get rid of it entirely. So it's just one thing to consider. And like I said, I'm skipping a lot of stuff in this report, but it goes over a lot of details like that, really important details like the visibility conditions of the astronauts that I don't want to spend too much time on. We don't have a whole lot of time for everything like that. But it's still really interesting data, and it's definitely relevant to the discussion of viewing UFOs out of a tiny little dirty window. It's definitely important. Section on orbital dynamics, I'm definitely skipping that. Let's go ahead and flip
You sure you don't have a bunch of stuff highlighted you'd like to go over?
I mean, I'd read it, but it's believe it or not, it is relevant. That's why it's in here. But unless we want like a 3-hour episode, I'm gonna have to skip some of this stuff. All right, next excerpt I got here. During re-entry, the spacecraft and fragments flaked off its surface become luminous. And fragments flaked off of its surface become luminous, producing the displays sometimes reported as UFOs. A satellite re-entry normally occurs along a grazing path, but the trajectories of meteorites are more radial, and therefore the duration of luminosity is usually no more than 2 to 3 seconds. So the point of that is that they're going over everything with a fine-tooth comb. They're considering every possibility when looking at these UFO sightings from these astronauts. This was not, this particular chapter at least, this was not one of these Blue Book cases where they just kind of get the report and they just file it away and they don't really look at it. They don't investigate it. They're just like, yeah, okay, unidentified, not enough information, possible balloon, Venus, whatever. They're not just explaining. They actually went over all of the data with a fine-tooth comb. They looked under all of the stones on this one. They unturned all of everything. So that's important to know when we get to our conclusions later on when we talk about the 3 sightings. The next section we have is section 5, visual acuity of the astronauts. Like I said, they left no stone unturned. This is, oh, there she goes. I won't go over this whole section, but here, I just want to read one sentence here, or part of a sentence. One of the criteria in the selection of the astronauts to begin with was that they have excellent eyesight. So that is important to know because chances are they have better eyesight than you or I. And it's another piece of information that, they could probably see things that the average person might miss. So that's just, something important there I wanted to mention. All right, now here's a really cool sighting that is probably not anything anomalous, but we don't know for sure. So this was from astronaut Shira, reported a faint luminosity of Apache nature while south of Madagascar, looking in the general direction of India on October 3rd, 1963. Oh no, this is that's when the report was issued, I guess. Anyways, here's a quote. A smog appearing layer was evident during the 4th pass while I was in drifting flight on the night side. Almost at 32 degrees south latitude, I would say that this layer represented about a quarter of the field of view out of the window, and this surprised me. I thought I was looking at clouds all the time until I saw stars down at the bottom underneath the glowing layer.
Oh.
So what is that? There shouldn't be stars down there.
Just ships. Ships in the night.
It's something. Seeing the stars below the glowing layer was probably the biggest surprise I had during the flight. I expect that future flights may help to clarify the nature of this band of light, which appeared to be thicker than that reported by Scott Carpenter. All the astronauts of later flights knew of astronauts Shira's sighting, but on only one other occasion was an observation made of a similar phenomenon. At 05:11:34 seconds into the Mercury flight, astronaut Cooper reported, "Right now I can make out a lot of luminous activities in an easterly direction at 180 degrees yaw. I wouldn't say it was much like a layer. It wasn't distinct and it didn't last long, but it was brighter than I was. It wasn't even in the vicinity of the horizon and was not well defined. A good size. That sounds a little different to me, but it's similar, but not the same thing. So the main hypothesis of these two observations is that it was a tropical air glow. But air glow, we're talking about like a general glow, right? Not like stars or points of light. So that doesn't really explain the first one. Here's a conversation between Cooper and Roach, I'm guessing is on ground control. More like a patch? Smoother. It was a good-sized area. You didn't feel this had a discrete shape? It was very indistinct in shape. It was a faint glow with a reddish-brown cast. So that probably is the tropical air glow. But the stars, I'm a little more skeptical on that one. That's pretty interesting, but who knows? But in this document, they're saying that was probably not UFOs. But still, it's interesting. All right. So the satellites or the spaceships we're talking about are orbiting at a minimum height of 160 kilometers. The small fraction of the atmosphere above the spacecraft produces a very low amount of scattering, and it was anticipated that they would be able to see the full astronomical panoply is what they're calling it. But basically, they'd be able to see the stars. That's what they were anticipating, right? But they were surprised that was definitely not the case when they were up there, especially when the sun was above their horizon. They could not see the stars, even the brighter ones, which is a really interesting detail. So the reason why this is important is because if you're seeing stars and the sun is up for the astronauts, those are not stars. They're something else probably, right? Because you have limited visibility. So the inability to observe the stars is for two reasons. One, the satellite window surfaces scattered light from the oblique sun or even from the Earth sufficiently to destroy the visibility of stars. Like I said before, the window was often dirty from the launch. And two, the astronauts are generally not well dark adapted. So that what they're talking about there is the orbiter would make a revolution, I think like every 90 minutes or something, right? So it didn't really give them enough time for their eyes to go fully into dark mode to adjust to the darkness. And then when it came back, it was like a light. It was really bright when it came back, right? So that's also an important detail. What they could see would be similar to an aircraft at about 40,000 feet altitude, especially when you had poor conditions. So if you ever fly on like a jet airplane, those typically will fly at about 30,000 feet. I think it's like 30 to 35,000 feet is somewhere around the ballpark of where they're going to have their cruising altitude. And I think depending on the model of aircraft, it can be higher than that, but we'll say roughly 30,000 feet, just to give you an idea. All right, now here's a section about meteors. Meteors become luminous below 100 kilometers, well below any stable orbit. Sporadic observations were made by the astronauts who reported that the meteor trails could be readily distinguished from lightning flashes. So the point of that little excerpt is that you can rule out meteors in a lot of cases because they saw them, they knew what they were, you only saw them under specific circumstances, and they were pretty easy to identify.
It'd be so cool, though, to see not just, something of a phenomena, but just meteors and stars and the aurora borealis, like all these things from space. That's like really cool. And then so to see something that's even more strange than that.
Yeah. Well, like that astronaut said, he said, what was it, Shira? He said that was the most surprising thing I saw.
Right.
Was something that wasn't supposed to be there, basically. But yeah, you don't need to have a UFO to go into outer space and have a great time. I think it would be fun without UFOs. All right, Section 8, Observations of Artifacts in Space. As of January 1st, 1967, a total of 2,606 objects had been identified from 512 launchings, of which 1,139 were still in orbit and 1,467 had re-entered. The objects in quasi-stable orbits are cataloged by the North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD, and up-to-date lists of orbital characteristics are given annually in Planetary and Space Science magazine, I'm guessing, or a publication. So the point of that is we know exactly, at this point in time, these days there's a significantly higher number of objects in space, but at this time, we knew exactly what was there, and we knew exactly where it was at all times, or at least it would be easy to find out. If an astronaut saw something in the distance, it would be relatively easy to figure out what that thing was, what satellite it was, where it came from, and how long it had been there. All that kind of stuff. So we have an exact number of how many objects were in space at that time, and then it has charts. Table 7 talks about the number of satellite piece decays or reentries per year. So for instance, the first entry, 1957, pieces put in orbit during calendar year. There were 5 items put into orbit in 1957. And then all of them had decayed by 1967, or by 1963, all of those had decayed. So as of January 1st, 1967, there were 0 pieces in space from 1957. So this is a chart. Again, we don't need to go over this with a fine-tooth comb, but it's still really interesting data. You can look at where these pieces are from by year and how much is still there and how much has fallen back to the Earth, or probably burned up in reentry. Table 8 is a summary of artificial satellites for the decade 1957 to 1966. Total launchings 512, and then it has, how many things were launched and, total number of things, how many decayed, how many are still in orbit, and that kind of stuff. So pretty interesting data, but again, we don't need to go over it in detail. So skip ahead a couple pages here. All right, back to the document. At any given moment during the 2-year period of the Gemini program, 1965 and 66, approximately 1,000 known objects were in orbit. During the same biennium, I've never heard that word before, biennium, I guess that's 2-year period, there was a total of 918 known reentries. Even though the probability of a collision with an orbiting artifact is statistically trivial, NASA and NORAD coordinated closely to keep track of the relative positions in space of the objects orbiting there. So the point of that is that they were tracking stuff, right? They weren't just randomly going up and then finding out after the fact if they were in the vicinity of a satellite. They planned ahead of time to make sure they didn't run into things. So here's something involving the Proton 3 satellite, or so the story goes. An interesting example of an unexpected sighting of another spacecraft was made by Gemini 11 astronauts, quoting from the transcript, quote, "We had a wingman flying wing on us going into the sunset here off to my left. A large object that was tumbling at about 1 RPS, and we flew. We had him in sight. I say fairly close to us. I don't know. It could depend on how big he is, and I guess he could have been anything from our ELSS to something else. We took pictures of it. ELSS, Extra Vehicle Life Support System." The identification of the sighting was given as follows. We have a report on the object cited by Pete Conrad over Tananarive, Tananarive. How would you say that?
TR.
Tananarive. Tananarive.
Tananarive.
Okay, so Pete Conrad over Tananarive yesterday on the 18th revolution. It has been identified by NORAD as the Proton 3 satellite. Since Proton 3 was more than 450 kilometers from Gemini 11, it is unlikely that any photographs would show more than a point of light. So 450 kilometers, that's really far. But in space, maybe not so much. So the pictures referred are shown in enlargement in plates 17 and 18. So I did not see those in the report here, but they're out there somewhere maybe. I don't know. So Proton 3 and its rocket are included in the listings under the numbers. Okay, it gives numbers there. We don't really need that. Inspection of the photos taken at the time of the sighting, plate 17 and 18, reveals considerably more detail than just a point of light. If the distance from the spacecraft to Proton 3 is given by the NORAD calculations, then we may infer the physical separation of the several objects in the photograph, plates 17 and 18, are 100x enlargements of the photographs of Proton 3 made with the, I can't read it, camera, some type of camera of 38 millimeters focal length. 4 distinct objects can be distinguished with extreme separation of 30 millimeters, corresponding to 0.452 degrees or 3.5 kilometers at a distance of 450 kilometers. So that's interesting. So we have very specific data here. This is what I'm talking about. They have really specific data on this stuff, so we can figure it out. Multiple pieces of Proton 3, including possibly its booster, plus 2 other components, is what they think this one was. But again, if it was so far away, there's a little bit of ambiguity there. It's not entirely sure that you would be able to see it from that far away at that, with that much clarity. But it does look like that was probably that particular satellite, but they're not 100% sure about it. So a possible UFO, but possibly not. All right, the next one I want to talk about is the Agena Rendezvous. So the Agena Target Vehicle, was a practice rendezvous and docking vehicle that they launched. It was unmanned. It was basically a satellite that they would practice approaching and possibly docking to, which would help them in further missions and, like the Apollo missions where they'd have to do this kind of thing for realsies, right? So the Agena vehicle is a cylindrical object 8 meters long with a diameter of 1.5 meters. Its size makes it a conspicuous object at considerable distance when illuminated by the sun. So skipping a couple pages, some tables here. The sun illuminated Agena when close to the astronauts was of blinding brightness. Details could be made out at a distance of 26 kilometers. It was picked up visually at distances of up to 122 kilometers. So there we have a size, and we could compare that to the previous sighting to see if it's, if we could actually see it or not. It's just some interesting data that's available to us that gives you an idea of how far they can see when they're in orbit. Maybe not as far as you might think. All right, moving on now to the good stuff. All right, so the Glenn Fireflies, local debris. During the first Mercury manned orbital spaceflight, astronaut Glenn reported as follows. The biggest surprise of the flight occurred at dawn. Coming out of the night on the first orbit, at the first glint of sunlight off the spacecraft, I was looking inside the spacecraft checking instruments for perhaps 15 to 20 seconds. When I glanced back through the window, my initial reaction was that the spacecraft had tumbled and that I could see nothing but stars through the window. I realized, however, that I was still in the normal attitude. The spacecraft was surrounded by luminous particles. These particles were a light yellowish green color. It was as if the spacecraft were moving through a field of fireflies. They were about the brightness of a first magnitude star and appeared to vary in size from a pinhead up to possibly 3/8 of an inch. They were about 8 to 10 feet apart and evenly distributed through the space around the spacecraft. Occasionally, 1 or 2 of them would move slowly up around the spacecraft and across the window, drifting very, very slowly, and would then gradually move off back in the direction I was looking. I observed these luminous objects for approximately 4 minutes each time the sun came up. During the third sunrise, I turned the spacecraft around and faced forward to see if I could determine where the particles were coming from. Facing forwards, I could see only about 10% as many particles as I had when my back was to the sun. Still, they seemed to be coming towards me from some distance, so that they appeared not to be coming from the spacecraft. Dr. John A. O'Keefe has concluded that the most probable explanation of the Glenn effect is millimeter-sized flakes of material liberated at or near sunrise by the spacecraft. Now, that's an interesting sighting because he reported objects or little bits that were clearly much bigger than millimeter-sized flakes, like much, much bigger than that. Could that just be a lighting effect? I don't know. But notice also in his description, he said that it appeared they were coming from a distance, not from the spacecraft itself. Really quite an interesting sighting. This particular investigation is basically ruling them out as something that's coming from the spacecraft, but based on that description, I think that that's not necessarily 100% true. There's a possibility there that it could be something else. Observations by astronauts in subsequent flights showed that O'Keefe's interpretation is almost certainly correct. Astronaut Carpenter in Mercury 7 found, for example, that, quote, at dawn on the third orbit, as I reached for the densiometer, I inadvertently hit the spacecraft hatch and a cloud of particles flew by the window. I continued to knock on the hatch and on other portions of the spacecraft walls, That's pretty brave. He really trusts that engineering, right?
Yeah.
Let's knock it around a few times, see if it still holds up. And each time a cloud of particles came past the window. The particles varied in size, brightness, and color. Some were gray and others were white. The largest were 4 to 5 times the size of the smaller ones. One that I saw was half an inch long. It was shaped like a curlicue and looked like a lathe turning. Interesting. But still, that's not exactly what was described in the previous one, right? There's one important detail is this guy's knocking on the ship, so the particles are very clearly coming from the ship. Whereas in the previous sighting, the astronaut did not knock on the ship, and they said that they were not coming from the ship. So two very different things there. A modification of the knocking technique used by astronaut Carpenter to get the firefly effect was used by some of the Gemini astronauts who discovered that a brilliant display resulted from a urine dump at sunrise. The crystals, which formed near the spacecraft when illuminated by the sun, looked like brilliant stars. And that one, obviously, maybe not super relevant, but I thought it was interesting that something as mundane as urine could cause what would probably be an extremely beautiful light display in space. So I thought that was kind of a nice little juxtaposition there of something that's normally gross but looks really cool in space. We just had one of our more spectacular sights of our flight coming into sunset just before you acquired us. Either our cryo-hydrogen or a cryo-oxygen tank vented, and it just all froze when it came out, and it looked like we had 7 billion stars passing by the windows.
Wow.
Which was really quite a sight. Again, not a UFO, but still,
Yeah.
just try to imagine that, right? Oh man, I would love to go to space. These were really some lucky individuals to be able to go out and experience this stuff. Out of all the people who have ever existed, only a very small number of them have ever been able to have these experiences. It just kind of gets my imagination going. All right, here's a quote from an astronaut Lovell. Remember, he was the one that had the most time in orbit as of this report. I did not see any objects in space other than the ones we had put there, except for several meteors that whistled in below us during the night passing. I might mention during the last stand-up EVA, discarded? Yeah, last stand-up EVA we discarded, in addition to the EVA's 3 bags, one of which was the umbilical bag and the other had some food in it, and the third had several hoses that we were discarding. And I pushed these forward with a velocity, I would guess maybe 3 to 4 feet per second, and we watched these for quite some period until they finally disappeared about 2, maybe 3 or possibly 4 orbits later at sunrise condition. We looked out again and saw 4 objects lined up in a row, and they weren't stars. I know, they must have been these same things we tossed overboard. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because much has been made of this event by John A. Keel, who apparently thought there was a discrepancy between the number of objects thrown out by the astronauts, 3, and the number of objects later seen as illuminated, 4. So John A. Keel, he's a pretty big name in ufology. If you followed this topic for a while like I have, you'll see his name pop up occasionally. The pertinent part of Keel's article follows. You never read about it in your local newspaper, but during the last successful manned space shot, the flight of a Gemini, it looks like Gemini 12, it's really hard to read that bit. In November 1966, astronauts James Lovell and Edwin Aldrin reported seeing 4 unidentifiable objects near their orbit. We saw 4 objects lined up in a row, Captain Lovell told a press conference on November 23rd, and they weren't stars, I know. Several orbits earlier, he explained, they had thrown 3 small plastic bags of garbage out of the spacecraft. He hinted that these 4 star-like objects standing in a neat row were somehow that trio of non-luminous garbage bags. A careful reading of the original transcript, however, shows that 4 objects were discarded, i.e. the ELSS plus 3 bags. Now, the reason I'm going over this is because we do have those 4 pieces of trash that were discarded in the same orbit, and those 4 points of light very well could have been those objects, but maybe they weren't. that's ambiguous. In order to know that, you'd have to look at how reflective those bags were and estimate how far away those points of light were to determine if that could have been that specific trash or not. And that's a little above my pay grade. I wouldn't know how to do those calculations and whatnot, but it's still really an interesting case where it might be trash, but it might not be. I don't know. All right. Number 9, finally, what we've all been waiting for, the unidentified flying objects. There are 3 visual sightings made by the astronauts while in orbit, which, in the judgment of the writer, have not been adequately explained. So far, we've been talking about UFO kind of stuff that may or may not have been explained, stuff that could be debris from the spacecraft or trash, but we don't know for sure. But these are 3 slam dunk unexplained cases. The first was from Gemini 4 astronaut McDivitt, who had an observation of a cylindrical object with a protuberance. The second was from Gemini 4 as well. Astronaut McDivitt had an observation of a moving bright light at a higher level than the Gemini spacecraft. And 3 Gemini 7 astronaut Borman saw what he referred to as a bogey flying in formation with the spacecraft. These are really good observations, really good cases. And the reason I mentioned all that stuff earlier about how far away they could see and the fact that they couldn't see the stars and stuff like that, the reason I mentioned all that stuff is because that's, like I said, no stone unturned, and that's how they can rule out those things for like this. These weren't stars. These weren't other satellites. We are able to rule out all of that stuff and conclude that these are truly anomalous objects, whatever they may be. So that's why I mentioned all that stuff earlier. All right, first sighting, Gemini 4, cylindrical object with protuberance. Astronaut McDivitt described seeing at 3 o'clock CST on June 4th, 1965, a cylindrical object that appeared to have arms sticking out, a description suggesting a spacecraft with an antenna. It was not possible to estimate its distance, but it did have angular extension. That is, it did not appear as a point. It gave a white or silvery appearance as seen against the day sky. The spacecraft was in free drifting flight somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. One still picture was taken, plus some movie exposures, so they got actual movie film taken of this thing, plus movie film exposures on black and white film. The impression was not that the object was moving parallel with the spacecraft, but rather that it was closing in and that it was nearby. The reflection of the astronaut, or the reaction of the astronaut, was that it might be necessary to take action to avoid a collision. Now remember, they worked with NORAD to avoid objects when they launched these missions in the first place. The object was lost to view when the sun shone on the window, which was rather dirty. He tried to get the object back into view by maneuvering so that the sun was not on the window, but not able to pick it up again. So here you have an object that's, on a collision course, basically. The window's dirty, so it's probably not something far off that's very large. It's probably something that's close and small. There's a whole discussion about the dirty windows that I skipped, but you can check that out if you want. If you want to go over this stuff with a fine-tooth comb. When they landed, the film was sent from the carrier to land and was not seen again by McDivitt for 4 days. The NASA photo interpreter had released 3 or 4 pictures, but McDivitt says that the pictures released were definitely not of the object he had seen. His personal inspection of the film later revealed that what he had seen, although the quality of the image and of the blown-up point was such that the object was seen only hazily against the sky, but he feels that a positive identification had been made. So let's back up there. This is a really important detail. He turns in the photographs and the video footage to NASA. Later on, they show him a blown-up image, and he says, no, that's not it. That's different than what I saw. But then later, he changes his story to say, oh no, actually, that is what I saw. So it's almost like he was asked to change his story, right? Because at first he said, that is definitely not it. And the photos and videos that he submitted, as far as I can find, have never seen the light of day again. Only these photos that were released that he said were not the things that he saw. So whatever the video was, NASA squirreled that away somewhere, never to be seen again by the public. Nobody has ever seen this stuff. That's not suspicious, that's not a reason why they might cover up these 70 pages. Pretty interesting stuff. It is McDivitt's opinion that the object was probably some unmanned satellite. NORAD made an investigation of possible satellites and came up with the suggestion that the object might have been Pegasus, which was 1,200 miles away at the time. McDivitt questions this identification. I mean, we were talking about, the test craft there that was a certain size that could only be seen up to 160 kilometers away. And now they're saying that this was a satellite that was 1,200 miles away. And McDivitt's like, I don't know about that, guys. A preliminary identification of the object as Pegasus B is suspect. When fully extended, Pegasus B has a maximum dimension of 29.3 meters, which corresponds to 1/20th minute of arc at a distance of 2,000 kilometers. This is much too small an angular extension for the structure of the craft to be resolved, and thus does not agree with the description arms sticking out. Plus, like I said, the dirty windshield would make a distant object very difficult to see anyways. Later in the mission, Pegasus B was at a much more favorable distance, 497 kilometers, from the Gemini 4 spacecraft, or 4 times as close as during the reported sighting. Astronauts McDivitt and White reported that they were not successful in a serious attempt to visually identify the Pegasus B satellite during this encounter. So when the Pegasus B satellite is like a fourth of the distance is what they're claiming during this sighting, they were not able to see it. So that pretty much rules out any man-made satellite that could account for this object. Pretty interesting stuff. The 10 objects, in addition to Pegasus B in the NORAD lists, were all at considerably greater distances away from the Gemini 4 than admittedly crude estimate of 10 miles made by McDivitt, and were of the same or smaller size than Pegasus B. They would not appear to be likely candidates for the object. So there we have it. No stone unturned. They cannot find out what this object was. It was truly anomalous. So we have an object with, protuberances, arms or antennas or whatever you want to call it. We have photos and videos of this object that were covered up by NASA, and we don't know what this thing was. It was a genuine UFO sighting. I don't know. What do you think of that one, Agent Ether?
It's hard for me to say, but I'm going to give credence to whatever the astronauts think.
Yeah.
In this case, because I haven't been to space and I don't have their expertise.
Right.
And so when at first they said this is not what I've actually saw, it was something different. That made me think something unidentified.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that NASA is covering this up and that, McDivitt's like, dude, that's not what I saw. And then later on he comes out and he's like, actually, yes, that is what I saw. That's pretty weird, right? Oh, wait, hold on. I put that page down. I wasn't supposed to do that yet. Okay, so the next sighting, also by McDivitt, Gemini 4, moving bright light higher than the spacecraft. At 50 hours, 58 minutes, and 3 seconds of elapsed time on Gemini 4, or GT4, astronaut McDivitt made the following report. Just saw a satellite very high, spotted away just like a star on the ground when you see one go by, a long, long ways away. When I saw this satellite go by, we were pointed just about directly overhead. It looked like it was going from left to right, back towards the west, so it must have been going from south to north. Although McDivitt referred to this sighting as a satellite, I have included it among the puzzlers because it was higher than the GT4 and moving in a polar orbit. It was reported as looking like a star, so we have no indication of an angular extension. So yeah, they don't know how big it is, basically. It's hard to tell how big it is and how far away it is. The suggestion at the time of sighting that this was a satellite has not been confirmed, so as far as I know, by a definite identification of a known satellite. Conversations with McDivitt indicate that on one other occasion off the coast of China, he saw a light that was moving with respect to the star background. No details could be made out by him. So a polar orbit you would be able to really, really narrow it down. Remember earlier I mentioned they knew exactly how many things were in space?
Yeah.
And back then it was a lot easier to track that stuff because a rocket launch back then was a pretty significant event. And if, Russia or somebody launched a rocket, everybody would be following that. Everybody would know and would be tracking that and would be tracking any objects that were sent out from that. So it was pretty easy to track that stuff with so few objects in orbit. And the objects with a polar orbit would be even easier to track because you could really narrow down what that could be. And you could narrow it down even further based on the fact that it would be above the Gemini capsule. And there's nothing that can account for this sighting. Other than that, we don't know what it is, what it could have been. Something reflective, probably not man-made, could be a natural object. We just don't know. All right, and the third sighting, Gemini 7, bogey. This is a good one. Between the spacecraft and the ground control at Houston, here's a conversation we have. Spacecraft, so bogey at 10 o'clock high. Capcom says, "This is Houston, say again, 7. Said we have a bogey at 10 o'clock high. Roger that, Gemini 7, is this the booster or is that an actual sighting? We have several, looks like debris up here, actual sighting. You have any more information, estimate, distance, or size? We also have the booster in sight. Understand you also have the booster in sight, roger. Yeah, we have a very, very many, looked like hundreds of little particles banked on the left out at about 3 to 7 miles. Understand you have many small particles going by on the left. At what distance?" He just said. "At about, it looks like a path of the vehicle at 90 degrees. Roger, understand that they are about 3 to 4 miles away. They are past now that they are in a polar orbit. Roger, understand they are about 3 or 4 miles away. That's what it appeared like. That's Roger. Were these particles in addition to the booster and the bogey at 10 o'clock high? Roger, spacecraft, I have the booster on my side. It's a brilliant body in the sun against a black background with trillions of particles on it." Look how he describes that. It's got trillions of particles on it. "Roger, what direction is it for you? It's about my 2 o'clock position. Does that mean it's ahead of you? It's ahead of us at 2 o'clock, slowly tumbling." And this is, the astronaut is Lovell, by the way. The general reconstruction of the sighting based on the above consideration is that, in addition to the booster traveling in an orbit similar to that of the spacecraft, there was another bright object, or bogey, together with many illuminated particles. It might be conjectured that the bogey and particles were fragments from the launching of Gemini 7, but this is impossible if they were traveling in a polar orbit as they appeared to the astronaut to be doing. So here again, we have mysterious objects going in a direction that cannot be explained, and it cannot be explained by a man-made object. Pretty interesting stuff. What to make of it, I don't know, but I don't know. What do you think of this one, Agent Ether? Trillions of particles?
Trillions of particles. That's so interesting.
That's quite an interesting description, and it kind of makes me wonder if it's like individual points of light, but to describe it as trillions, I would imagine it would be like a shimmery field, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's such a fascinating description. All right. And then to finish up here, part of the conclusion, the 3 unexplained sightings, which have been gleaned from a great mass of reports, are a challenge to the analysts. So that, in other words, we're only looking at a small fraction of the reports available here. So there are many, many more interesting reports. They're just focusing on a handful. How they determined which reports to look at is a whole other story. Maybe I'll talk about that at another time. So especially puzzling is the first on the list, the daytime sighting of an object showing details such as arms or antennas protruding from a body having a noticeable angular extension. If the NORAD listing of objects near the GT-4 spacecraft at the time of the sighting is complete, as it presumably is, we shall have to find a rational explanation, or alternatively, keep it on our list of unidentifieds. So that's that pretty much summary, quick version of Chapter 6 there. A couple of really fascinating sightings and a couple of other mysterious ones. I don't know. I find this stuff really interesting and fascinating. Just so you know, the first part of Chapter 7 is also included in this. I'm not going to go over any of it. I'm just going to say Chapter 7 is public attitudes towards UFO phenomenon, and they go into a lot of detail and like a Gallup poll and all kinds of really cool stuff.
Poll, huh?
Yeah, this is like totally nerd territory here, and I did read it, but it's maybe not super relevant to this episode. So I won't go over it now, but it's really, really cool stuff. All right. That's what I got for you this time, Agent Ether. I love it. And I could go on and on about this particular chapter. It's really good stuff. But all right, you have one more thing for us, and it looks like your microphone got knocked by a doggy there. So there you go. All right, what do you got for us, Agent Ether?
Well, finally, I stumbled across another case in the Bluebook files that I found quite amusing. And I'll just go ahead and read through the letter that was sent in as to Project Bluebook.
All right.
It's from one Redacted.
Okay.
So,
Mr.
hello,
Redacted.
This is Redacted here. When I went out to the woods yesterday at about 5 till 2, I saw this here flying saucer. It was about 20 to 30 feet in diameter, and it was about 6 feet thick, I believe. Roughly 6 feet thick, but it stood above the ground about 4 feet on 4 stilts, like landing gear. And then there was this here, and then I went around, and I was going around on the other side to get a closer look, but I decided, and I went around the other way, but I got within 100 feet from it. So I got in the bushes, and I come out, and what I was supposed to see was this robot. This here like a robot. He was about 5 foot tall, and he had like a glass dome on his head, and then his eyes were kind of funny too. They seemed like they were far apart and flat in the middle, but the nose was down the same as we are. The chin came like a pointy little chin, and then he walked up and down to where the spaceship was, and he turned and he came and he walked to the bushes within 15 feet from where I was, where the bushes were. And I was outside those bushes there, stooping down, looking out, and I stopped for maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And then I finally saw he brought something up. Well, I figured it was a camera. He brought it up to his chin, about that level, and there was this big flash. And then about by that time, I got kind of scared, and I took off and into the branches, and I hit my head as I came out, and the glass fell off, and I was like lying there right on the ground to the side of the bushes there. And he got up again, and he took another picture, of me. So then he turned around and went back to this here flying saucer, and then he got inside, and I noticed the blade of the stairs. There was like round steps that went inside a cylinder, and it must have been, maybe around 16, 18 inches in diameters, but the steps, they seemed to go inside. And as they were going up one at a time, they went inside here, this chamber-like area. And then the chamber, it went up inside the ship so that when the ship started, those blades started to move, something like a Venetian blind. Like how a Venetian blind opens, that's how these blades moved. And so then after a while, there was this rim that started to go around making a whistling sound and made a little thunder-like. And then it seemed like it was getting nearer to us, and then it was going very fast. And it stood right here. These stilts were like landing gear, and they seemed to come up under the ship. They went right inside the ship, and then she took off. In 10 seconds, the thing was gone in 10 seconds. It went straight up, right up into the air it went. And then I looked down, and I found some writing material with some very queer writing on it. But some of the fellows were joking about it down here, and the radio stations were joking about it, that it looked like Chinese writing. But it wasn't. It was very queer, very thin. I don't know what kind of stuff. It looked to be more like Kleenex than very thin. It was made of this fabric. I don't know what you'd call some stuff it was made of. And the fellows from the CIA, they just came here now and back in the woods, and they took pictures of it. And then a lot of, there was footprints everywhere, a lot around in the dirt. And they went to where there were holes in the ground, and they took pictures. And now they're doing some investigating on that.
That is a wild story.
So this guy actually, he got in the newspaper, and in these files, there actually is these characters. You can see the characters. They look kind of like runes and Chinese characters mixed up together. Uh-huh. And then there's a translation that I found, and it says, "Planet Mars, are you coming soon? We miss you very much." I don't know.
So maybe they got like one of those travel guides with basic phrases, That sounds like you ever get one of these? You ever see one of these travel guides at the bookstore where it'll be, okay, I want to go to France, and it'll have like basic phrases in French, like, where is the bathroom? I will miss you very much. A table for two, please.
Why did you stay away too long is the last part of the message.
Yeah, exactly. Like the message doesn't make any sense if it's in like Chinese, right?
So they sent out a whole team. They did an investigation, and they even the who is it? The Institute of Paper Chemistry was asked to analyze the paper, the fabric that the writing was on.
Uh-huh.
So they came back and they said, well, yeah, that it's actually fibers used by several companies in the county for cigarette papers.
Okay.
Somebody wrote the message on these cigarette papers, and they said where it came from, and they like had this whole report that they sent in to Mr. Who is it? Quintanilla?
Yeah, Quintanilla. Yeah.
Quintanilla.
Hector Quintanilla, the head of Project Bluebook.
So they actually, the thing that blew me away was this was so obviously a hoax, but they did this whole investigation. They had a team come out. They took, imprints of where the guy said the landing gear had been. They analyzed the paper.
Yeah.
They translated the message about Mars. They had a team come out and interview him. They even have in here a prototype of what the landing gear might look like, possible footpad configuration for the footprints in the sand. And there's like a diagram. So there's this whole investigation into something that was obviously a hoax. The report says there were tons of footprints around what the spaceship was where it allegedly landed. And there were footprints that were visible in the soil. They were about one man's average footprint apart. They looked kind of like fishing boots or shoes. They measured the holes. They came out with Geiger counters. They were looking at the soil for like soil samples to see if anything was radioactive. And in the end, they just said, we think this is a hoax.
Or, okay, bear with me a little bit. So the visitors come.
Okay.
They land. They get out of the ship. They're going to want to walk around a little bit, right?
Yes.
They're not going to just stay. You're not going to come all this way and just stay in your ship. You're going to have a little cruise around, check out the scenery, maybe have a picnic, And they probably encountered somebody, and they said, okay, well, we want to give you guys a message, but we have nothing to write on. You guys don't use the same stuff as us.
Right.
So the only thing this person had available was a cigarette wrapper. So that's what they used to write on.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah,
And what about
totally.
What about the robot taking pictures of him in the bushes?
Yeah, I mean, aliens have robots, I'm sure.
Robots with cameras?
Yeah, with cameras. That's a fun story, but it's also unfortunate because they wasted real resources. It's stories like that must really make it frustrating to investigate these things seriously, because you have a limited budget and you got to waste a ton of money analyzing papers and all this other stuff when there might be really good cases out there, but you don't get to necessarily pick and choose every time. You just have to take what's in front of you at the moment. So it really, this kind of stuff does hurt serious investigations into the topic. It's kind of unfortunate, but it is a fun story.
Yep. Yes, it was.
That was a good one. Well, is that your last one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really fun way of doing it. I would not have thought to go into hoaxes, but those are some really good stories. And there are some good stories in the Blue Book files that are clearly not anomalous. Like my favorite one that I've done before was, remember that guy who was like staring at his TV fuzz all night?
Yes.
And then he saw a UFO in the TV fuzz. That one was pretty hilarious. He's probably drunk or on drugs or something. Who knows?
I actually ran across, because I was kind of looking around randomly, I ran across some pictures, like some photographs, and they're just white lights against black. They're photocopies of photographs, so they're not very interesting, but they weren't in any files. And we always talk about how things get misfiled, or they'll refer to photographs in the files and you can't find them. And
right.
I actually found a lot of photographs that weren't referenced anywhere.
Yeah.
And they weren't interesting, or I would like give links or something to them.
Yeah, they're not always labeled, and it looks like you're looking at a reproduction of a reproduction of a reproduction. The photos, it's hard to often in the Blue Book files, it's often difficult to see any sort of details in them. And I've seen plenty of them that are just like black. It just looks like a black photo
Yeah.
with maybe a pinpoint of light. And you're like, I can't see anything in this. Like, it's useless. So I wonder if you went to the files, if you'd have the actual photos and maybe if you got a better quality scan. I'm not sure.
I imagine going to the archives, though, where the photos are, and there just being so much, like so many documents to go through.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said earlier we were talking and I said, man, if I won the lottery, I would love to go back and get higher quality scans of these. Not that Fold 3 did a bad job. It's just, well, for two reasons. First, Agent Ether said that she was having trouble accessing the Fold 3 website. Like they're having...
Yeah, I was trying to like go back and forth between pages. Like if you open up one PDF page to read through it, you want to be able to read the next page.
Right.
And it wouldn't let me. It just said there was like an error. So then I had to like manually go through and do it. So it was very time consuming. I was having a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and that's the only place online you can find this stuff. So if that goes down, we will no longer be able to access these important documents.
No more Blue Book.
Yeah, we would have to just go to the building. I forget exactly where it is. It's in the middle of friggin' nowhere, though. So you'd have to go there in person to do this stuff. So that's why Fold 3 is such a tremendous resource, because normally these documents, the government has not made these available online in entirety, at least not to my knowledge. So it's quite the resource. Fold 3 is quite the fantastic resource. But if I ever won the lottery, I would go and buy expensive equipment, get extremely high quality scans of this stuff, and upload them to a different website so that we'd have a different resource. So if there was a point of failure, if one went down, you'd have the other one, right?
As they say, we won't tell everyone we won the lottery, but there will be signs.
Yeah. Yeah. If we won the lottery, we wouldn't tell anybody, because you'd have friends coming out of the woodwork you haven't seen for 20 years being like, hey, I heard you won the lottery.
But there will be signs.
I need a brand new car and it has to be a Mercedes for reasons, But yeah, you will see signs. If we win the lottery, you will see new Blue Book files going up. And I will probably also cancel the Patreon because, I won't need money anymore for the show. Stuff like that, But anyways, that's basically all we got. Any final thoughts, Agent Ether?
No, really fun. Love these Blue Book cases.
Yeah, I love this one. I could do this every week. I tell you what, these are awesome. There's some 12,000 cases in Project Blue Book or something. So we could do quite a few episodes on these. I think this is number 9, if I remember correctly. This is only our 9th one. So, all right. Well, anyways, thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time,
keep it strange.
Oh, and also if you're watching or listening to this on YouTube, give us a like or a thumbs up. It really helps out the algorithms there for people to find the show. And if you have any questions or comments, you can put them on the video. I will look for them and answer them if I can, not necessarily in a timely manner, but keep those up on there. People have asked some questions. For instance, somebody asked about Isaac Coy. So I mentioned on a previous episode, I mentioned somebody named Isaac Coy, Isaac Koi. And they're asking like, okay, who is this guy? What do you mean, Isaac Coy? So that comment was deleted. I went to respond to it and I could not find that comment any longer for whatever reason on YouTube. So apologies to whoever posted that. But Isaac Coy is he's an individual. I don't know if he's still active, but he was a person who's been active on the above top secret forums for years. He is a barrister in England. That's what we call lawyers here in the States. And he does UFO documents type stuff. He's made a lot of documents available online that you can read through that are not generally available to the public. He's done many efforts to scan documents and upload them to various places for people to access. So, a huge benefit to the UFO researcher community or anybody with the UFO podcast. I've referenced documents he's made available many times in the past, and I'm sure I will many times again in the future. I have a treasure trove of thousands and thousands, tens and thousands, just gigabytes and gigabytes of data that I've downloaded that he's made available, that he working with other people, of course. It's not single-handed, but he's organized it. And, everything from books to magazines, news articles, old forum posts that are no longer available online, just endless discussions. It's a tremendous resource. Anytime I'm doing a topic that has hard to find information that's not readily available, I can search this archive with searchable PDFs. And more often than not, I find really good information somewhere in there, although it does take a little bit of time. But anyways, that's who Isaac Coy is, to answer that question. If you have any other questions, you can, probably the best place to reach us is on Discord, because I have that installed on my phone. So if you post something in Discord, it goes right to my phone, and I check Discord pretty much daily. I don't check the email very often because nobody ever emails me. And I don't check the YouTube comments very often because I'm not on YouTube that much. So if you want to get into contact with us, those are the best ways to do it. Basically Discord, or leave a comment on YouTube and I'll get back to you if I can. All right. Well, once again, thank you guys for listening. Keep it strange.